Hey folks, this video covers two of ThruNite's pocket-sized lights. This is their TI as well as their TiS line. Now for those not too familiar with it, the TI came back a while ago and it did feature two different models. There was one that had a low that was a firefly mode and then another model that had a low of 3 lumens. So the TIs I picked up a while back ago. I purchased these for friends and family, just never got around to gifting them. Got 3 pinks and one for myself. I guess this is gold. Although I'm not sure if the color is coming out perfectly. It's a little bit perhaps more golden here on the video than I'm seeing in real life. But in terms of the TIs, these 4 were provided by ThruNite for review. These are a fixed single mode. They only have 60 lumens output and it's max. There is no low mode, but I don't necessarily find that's a bad thing. I'll get into that a bit later. But for now, as you can see, they come in a pretty much standard cardboard packaging with a plastic window. In terms of the accessory that it comes with, either model, 2 spare O-rings as well as a mini key ring for you so that you could attach this onto your keychain or whatever else you may fancy to attaching it to. It does of course also feature the instruction manual, but you don't really need it because, as mentioned, it's just one level. You just twist it on and off. Now the TI model is a little trickier to operate because of that 2 output levels and the fact that it's achieved through kind of like a leaf spring, so you just have to be very gentle about it. And I'll cover this in depth later, but as you can see, that is the low mode, and then if you twist it further all the way down, it will activate the max output. Now you don't want to overdo that because just beyond this rubber foam, which acts as a physical reverse battery protection, you will see that tiny little leaf spring that I mentioned. I call it spring, but it's really not. It's just really a metal tab. And the reason is that if you depress that too hard, it will stay permanently affixed and you would lose the low mode. Now, that's one particular thing that I'm not fond of this model. I wish it had been implemented a different way. But on the plus side, it's just, one single action. You don't need to, twist on, twist off to change the level. But on the other hand, this kind of, I feel, has been Achilles heels of this particular light. I've had to pull that back out with a thin flathead screwdriver on multiple occasions because I've over tightened this. By comparison, here's the base of the TiS, and as you can see, there is no spring. It's just simply a flat contact point for the positive tip of the battery. It does also feature that foam again for a physical reverse battery protection. Given the tube is so narrow, it's hard to see into the base of it, but as you can see there is no spring. It's simply a flat contact point that has the anodizing removed. I do actually have this illuminated with the TiS at the moment. Now, one particular thing I like about the TI over the TiS is the fact that, again, there's two stages. The lowest stage, the draw is so minute that you could really drain the heck out of cells before they're fully depleted. So given the voltage range of 0.9 to 1.5 volts, you have the flexibility of using rechargeable cells with 1.2 volt nominal voltage up to alkaline cells or perhaps even lithium cells, although I haven't confirmed about the lithium because they do have a slightly higher resting voltage, so I wouldn't just go about using that yet. And again, to be clear, I'm talking about lithium primary cells, not lithium ions. Now, I've been just looking around for pretty much whatever generic bad cells that I had lying around that wouldn't function in any other device, but it still functions great on the 3 lumens mode of this light. So this cell, if I'm not mistaken, was somewhere down actually near perhaps 0.9 or so, but it still works great in that 3 lumens mode. And I can imagine that the Firefly model with, I believe, sub-lumen low mode could probably drain these cells even furthermore. Now, one thing to keep in mind though is that even though it says 0.9, don't be mistaken that the light will shut itself off after 0.9. Yes, the light will physically turn off because the voltage is not sufficient to power the emitter, but it will still continue to drain your cells. So in alkaline cells, you wouldn't care because it's disposable. However, with nickel metal hydride or your rechargeable cells, that does matter because you don't want to over discharge your cells. In terms of cell recommendation, I'm not at all a fan of primary cells, so alkalines or again primary lithium cells, but I do like rechargeable cells only because I like to be green, etc. whatnot, but hey, to each his own. The cells that I particularly like in the AAA category, I know naturally people would say, well, envelopes, yeah, okay, fine, there is life after envelopes. These old Sanyo cells rated at 1000 milliamps per hour are actually the best I've ever tested, and in terms of even self-discharged, they've been pretty good, although of course not as good as envelopes, but quite good considering its capacity. They've performed well. I never really did any formal amperage meeting, but they've handled, high loads pretty well. The next one I would recommend is actually these GP Recycle Plus. These have been the next favorite after these Sanyo's. These Sanyo's are pretty old now. I haven't been able to find a supply for new ones of these, so I believe they've been discontinued. But these GP recycles are low self-discharge as well, and in my opinion, they actually are just a little bit better than the in-loops in runtime testing as well as current draw. In terms of the size, the TI and TIS are both fairly representative of AAA lights. They're not particularly small nor large, and as you can see here, compared to the Phoenix L0D, which is a light from yesteryear, but still, in my collection. It's just a tad shorter, but of course, I guess if it didn't have this loop for the mini ring, it could have been shorter than that, I suppose. But overall, again, it's not, overly large or small. Now, in terms of the shortest, obviously it's not, because a CR2 size light would easily trounce that in terms of the shortness. But in terms of overall diameter, unless you get into specialized cells, as far as standard size cells goes, the AAA form factor is definitely one of the skinniest that you'll get into. Handling wise, given its size, it's very easy to handle, and I suppose for those with super large hands, it may be slightly problematic because you don't have enough length here between your two front fingers with a backing support here. So again, it varies. I don't really know for sure, but I'd imagine it may be a little bit more difficult to handle for those with particularly large hands, which I don't have. But anyway, the texturing on here does provide very decent grip for you to operate the head for twisty on-off action, and likewise for the TIS to give you, kind of like that minute control, granular control that you need for the two levels of operation. Now again, being a AAA size light, it is fairly small, so you could place it between your mouth in emergency in case you want to illuminate something where you're repairing something and you require the use of both hands or whatnot. I suppose one thing that they should have included is some type of clip, although with this particular design I don't really see a way to mount it. But if they had a clip that could be mounted either bezel up or bezel down, at least with the bezel up you could click it into the brim of a hat and use it kind of as a makeshift headlamp, if you will. And again, given its form factor, they make great keychain lights, although I particularly don't like to carry anything on my keychain, but for those so inclined, of course, they make great choices. And of course, the various colors allow one to gift it to males or females. Fit and finish wise, these lights are just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, there's really, again, because it's a two-piece setup with just the head and the body and simple twisty operation, there really isn't much that can go wrong. These glass, again, I don't know if they're AR coated or not, I can't really tell. But if they weren't, well, perhaps they could be. But beyond that, though, the anodizing finish is absolutely rock solid. None missing whatsoever, not even on the tips here, and completely filled out between the grooves. As you can see here, the shade between the head and the body matches very nicely. The laser engraving are all very nice and crisp with no blotchiness in them whatsoever. You just have the company name as well as the model name and a individual serial number on each. Now these serial numbers are unique to each light, so the reason I say that is these copycat manufacturers, they typically do not do that because it's extra expense to make each number different, so that's something key to watch out for. I suppose one thing that may be a consideration for some against this light is the fact that this cannot be used in tail standing mode because of the fact of that mounting point for that mini ring, so you can't simply just dump it onto the table. But in all things considering, though, if that's not a important thing to you, then by all means, this was really meant to be a keychain light, so I don't really see. But here's a Phoenix L0D, and it is a keychain light as well. They have theirs implemented in such a way that the mounting hole is here. Now, I don't believe this was the original lanyard or wrist strap for this light. It was actually, I think, a solitaire maglite or some generic light. Anyway, I just mounted it here, and that mini split loop ring was normally able to fit through that gap there, so you could still use this in perfect tail standing mode. Whereas, again, this implementation is just a little different, but in consideration, it's a EDC keychain size light. I don't know that that's necessarily a big deal, but just something to point out again. Now, one particular thing I did want to cover about these lights were the coloring. There has been a thread asking about what is the pink of the TI and TIS, and as you could clearly see here, it transitioned between the TI and the TIS. The TI, to my eyes, is more of a guess a fuchsia, or hesitate to call it magenta, but it's really, yeah, it's kind of magenta fuchsia, whereas the TiS is really more closer to a pink, although it does look a little purplish on the color. I do have this locked in because of the compact fluorescent light here, but this truly is more of a light pink, although as mentioned, it's coming out a little purplish here. I will cover this a little later in daylight so you could get a better idea of these lights. Also, the finishing, this has more of a, I guess, matte finish to it, whereas this has more of a glossy sheen to it, as you can see here. Here's a side-by-side close-up for you. And another close-up of the three TIs just to show you the consistency of the coloring that was applied on these lights. Now as for the rest of the colors, again, this is the only TI in the group. These three are TIS. I would say the gold is a little bit, it's perhaps a little bit more golden. It's actually a little bit richer and darker that I'm seeing in real life, but on the camera it's perhaps a little bit more lighter. Whereas the black, you know, that's pretty much, you can't go wrong there. It does look very rich because I do have this, I think, in a certain color profile. Likewise for the blue, this is a little bit more blue than I'm seeing in real life. In real life, it's more of a lighter blue than this. And the lime, as a matter of fact, looks a little subdued in the video. In real life, it's a much richer, nice lime green than that. So I've now got the 8 ThruNite lights out in direct sunlight. It's roughly about 2 p.m. here in the Northern Hemisphere. That can of Coke is used as a reference because hopefully Coke is universal regardless of where you are around the world, and that's fairly representative of what I'm seeing with my eyes. Likewise, for these colors, I would say so far they're pretty much on track. Like say this pink, it may look like it has a very light hint of purple in there, but for the most part it is pink. That green's probably a little bit duller than I'm seeing in real life. It looks a little bit richer in real life. Black is black, the blue not as rich as I'm seeing, right? And the gold is fairly representative. Again, likewise in real life I'm seeing it's a shade darker, and those fuchsia are pretty much on target. But as you can see, there was definitely a transition of the coloring from the ThruNite TIs to the TIS in terms of the pink color. The UI I've covered earlier, but just to make it more formal, as mentioned, the TIS is simply on and off. It just does not get any easier than that. Twist on, twist off, that's it. As Miyagi-san said, wipe on, wipe off, but anyway, haha. Whereas the TI, you would have to carefully and perhaps more delicately twist it into, you can see that it's on. Now this is currently on in that 3 lumen mode, and then further twist it down until you've tightened it, but just not, you know, over tightening it until you get max output. The hotspot of the TIS is fairly tight given the use of the XPE emitter. This is currently roughly, I would say, about 10 degrees, and the overall spill is actually not too bad. Let me just reduce the shutter speed so you can get the idea of the overall spill. I would say that's roughly about 70 degrees, give or take, roughly. The TI also has a fairly tight hotspot, roughly 10 degrees. And the overall spill is also roughly about 70 degrees. The ThruNite TiS has a pretty nice beam profile in that there's no ringiness. There's just a very nice tight hotspot, although of course on the shutter speed that I'm at, it's not really transitioning down, but my finger, the tip of my finger I should say, is actually the center of the hotspot, whereas what you're seeing on the video here is actually more the surrounding corona area. Then it transitions pretty smoothly to this flood beam out here. Now by comparison, here is ThruNite TI. First in that 3 lumen mode, and then finally screw down tighter for max. Now based upon what I'm seeing here, the TIS actually has a more tighter intense hotspot. It's probably just a smidgen brighter than the TI as well. But overall, they're quite similar, but in terms of just raw performance, the TIS definitely wins easily. It's definitely visible to the naked eye. And here they are side by side. Now the paper that I'm projecting on is not perfectly flat, so just ensure that there is no difference caused to the beams because of the paper. I'm going to flip this around. The TIS is currently on my left, and the TI is on my right. So I'm just going to transition this over. So as can be seen, the TIS definitely has a more intense central hotspot as compared to the TI, and it is a bit brighter overall. So in conclusion, these really are very, very nifty lights. They make great for EDC, although if you've been watching my videos, you'll know that AAA is not particularly a favorite format of mine, although I do particularly like the implementation of the TiS because of the no-brainer on and off. 60 lumens is fairly bright and not bad for most general purpose uses. Unless you really gotta light up a forest, well then, fine, you gotta carry another light. But for overall use, this particular one I've actually been using a lot because of the beam profile. It actually does have a decent flood at night, and the 3 lumens, it's a little bit high for fully night adapted eyes, but overall still pretty good for navigation overall. Whereas the TiS, like I said, no brainer. They make for nice gifts, especially currently right now. I believe for the US, it's only going for $6.95 US here. So again, they make for fantastic gifts, or even just for personal use as well. So kudos ThruNite, very nice lights, man. And that concludes this review. As part of FTC disclosures, the 4 ThruNite TiS were provided by ThruNite Review, the rest were purchased by me.